It's 6:03, so I'll call the meeting to order at 6:03. Welcome to Cohoes City School District's Board of Education meeting for April 22nd, 2020. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, could we get a roll call, please?
Sorry, I was muted. Mrs. Giller?
Here.
Mr. Pascal?
Here.
Mrs. Annalee?
Here.
Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Mrs. Dion?
Here.
Mrs. Carey?
Here.
And Mr. Nolan?
Here. If anyone has any comments from the public, please send them to boecomment@cohoes.org. That's BOE, short for Board of Education, comment@cohoes.org. I'll put that in the WebEx chat as well, along with your name and address, and we'll use questions from that email in lieu of our normal public comment period. And I'll turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Spring.
Thank you. Good evening, Board of Education members and members of our Cohoes school community. This is Superintendent Jennifer Spring. On behalf of the Cohoes City School District, I welcome you and I thank you for joining us this evening. Before we get started with tonight's budget presentation, I would like to provide a few updates. Charter schools. As payments to charter schools is something we have discussed as part of our budget, I wanted the board to know that we are in the process of sending out letters, emails, phone calls to Cohoes families who attend charter schools to let them know about our meal distribution and to check in with them to see if we can provide any support at this time. We are also contacting the charter schools directly to ask for their continuity of learning plans to ensure they are meeting the needs of Cohoes children who attend their schools. Connecting with our students. A question was asked at our last board meeting about the schedule of teacher-student check-ins and teacher office hours. This has been posted to our website. Additionally, we were asked about our efforts in ensuring how we are reaching out and connecting with each student, each and every student. The list keeps getting smaller, which is good news, but we aren't going to stop until we have been able to contact each student. To help us with this effort, we have enlisted the help of Jim Ward, the Public Safety Commissioner for the City of Cohoes, and we will be working in coordination to make home visits to help us track down some of our families and deliver messages to them. I also wanted to give a shout out to Mayor Keeler for having the Cohoes Department of Public Works pave Elm Street for us and then continue about 20 feet onto the district's property at the high school. This was definitely needed as there were a lot of potholes. We greatly appreciate the spirit of teamwork and collaboration as we are one Cohoes and working together is very important. A school re-entry plan. Our BOCES has provided guidance on reopening schools following COVID-19 closures. While the governor has not provided any specific information on when we will be returning to our buildings, we wanted to be proactive and begin these discussions so we are prepared. We will be reviewing the document at tomorrow's admin council meeting to discuss such things as equipment and supplies needed, infection control protocols, building and classroom procedures, including arrival and dismissal, and the use of personal protective equipment. I would also like to expand this response team to include other stakeholders, such as Board of Education members, nurses, teachers, parents, and students. Staff Access Day this Friday. Since the closure has been extended through May 15th and we are entering the next phase of continuity of learning, we wanted to provide all staff with the opportunity to enter our buildings this Friday. Principals have already prepared a schedule that allows for social distancing. This will also allow members to retrieve resources and materials needed for the remainder of the school year and grab any personal items that they may have left. Our elementary buildings are also preparing for the distribution of additional materials and resources that will be distributed to our families on Wednesday next week. Buildings are also on their third or maybe fourth deployment of Chromebooks, and at this point we have distributed over half of our inventory to our students, and we will continue to do so. I can answer any questions on the updates at this point, or we can wait till the end, whichever the board prefers. Okay, Erin, we can wait till the end and answer all questions at the end. Erin, I would like to put the budget presentation on the screen.
Okay.
Okay, hi everybody. Great pictures. All right, you can proceed to the next slide. Okay, the New York State budget. As we shared in our last meeting, foundation aid for the next school year is flat, meaning that projections are being held at the same level. We all know this is unfair. It is not equitable for our students and for our community, especially since we are heavily reliant on state aid, as 55% of our budget does come from the state. This disproportionately impacts us in comparison to our suburban neighbors. The pandemic adjustment. As we shared again at our last board meeting, this adjustment was included in our foundation aid, where reductions in state aid were offset through the Federal CARES Act. The state budget includes a mechanism for periodic adjustments, which authorizes the ongoing assessment of state revenue. So what does this mean? The state can reduce allocations to localities, including school districts, if revenue comes in below budget. The determination for reductions would be made during specified measurement periods, April 1st through April 30th, May 1st through June 30th, and April 1st through December 31st. We will know if we received an adjustment to our state aid payment for the first look back period, the first week in May. These look back periods pose the possibility for additional or mid-year cuts, meaning that we could receive less state aid funding than expected. If this happens, we will need to implement an emergency response plan to address the additional lost in aid. And over the weekend, the governor cautioned for the potential for additional cuts to state aid if federal assistance is not provided. Erin, you may now go to the next slide. This is draft 2 of our budget. You will recall that on February 26th, we proposed the first draft of the 2021 budget. This does seem like a long time ago because our world has drastically changed in such a short period of time with the COVID-19 pandemic. The state released their budget on April 2nd, and with it, we saw the early impact of the health crisis on the state's finances. As we shared at our last meeting, we have had to adjust our budget goals and keep the growth of next year's budget to 0%. Therefore, the proposed budget for the 2021 school year is the exact same as the budget approved by voters for this current school year. While these are extremely difficult circumstances, our goal and our commitment is to preserve the quality of education for our students as best as we can. Now I would like to turn the presentation over to Stacy Mackey, the school business official for the Cohoes City School District. And Erin, yes, you already went to the next slide. Very good.
Good evening. As a recap for the budget proposals originally presented in late February to the Board of Education, we're going to refer to that as Draft 1. So the proposed budget in late February was $44.3 million. At the time, there was an identified budget gap of nearly $1.2 million. We had identified budget goals to cap growth, year-over-year growth of the budget to 1%. Originally, when we presented in February, the budget goals were to strengthen the cash position of the district, as we had historically relied heavily on the use of fund balance and reserves to balance our budget. With the release of the state budget in early April, with the foundation aid being at the same levels as the 1920 school year, it was clear that we were going to have to adjust our budget goals, and we would have a 0% growth proposed as a result. So again, the proposed budget is $43.8 million. That is the same as the current year budget, and the new gap figure is $1.6 million. Next slide, please, Erin. So under both draft 1 and 2, the tax cap remains the same. So the maximum allowable tax levy for Cohoes City Schools is just over $16 million. That is a 2.32% increase, and new revenue for the district of $363,000. This is reported to the state comptroller March 1st on an annual basis. As far as estimated tax rate, we use our best estimate as provided from the city for the total tax roll for the upcoming year, and the calculation is 37.8 for the proposed estimated tax rate. Now this number will change. The tax roll for the city is finalized in July, so that is our best estimate at this point in time. Estimated impact to our average homeowner for a home with an assessed value of $150,000 would just be about $60 on an annual basis, or just under $5 per month. Next slide, please. This is an expense summary, a high-level summary. Key takeaways here are employee benefits. You see growth in that category. That is attributed to rate increases for TRS and health insurance premiums. You also see modest growth in transportation. Our contracts are based off of estimates. Contract extensions are based off of estimates. This does include contract forgiveness for CDTA, 30% reduction in their contract for the upcoming year, which resulted in $36,000 in savings to the district. Next slide, please. Revenues. Key takeaways in these areas are the state and the building aid, again, are 55% of our total revenue. We are expecting a modest increase in federal aid. That's on Medicaid reimbursement. Consumer utility taxes are trending on point, so no real change there. Payment in lieu of taxes are based off of estimates as provided by the city, so a modest increase there. Key takeaways in revenues, besides the state aid, is the interfund revenues and fund balance. So as part of our budget goals, it was a goal to reduce our dependency on use of reserves. So you'll see over 30% reduction from 1920 to 2021. It is important to note that the two reserves that are being used mainly are ERS and TRS in the proposed budget, and those two reserves would be exhausted after June 2021. Fund balance, why there is $116,000 in appropriated fund balance. We don't anticipate that we'll use the $317,000 that was allocated for the current school year. So why the dollar figure isn't zero, you will note as a percentage of the budget, it is zero as a percentage of the overall budget. Next slide, please.
Okay, this is Superintendent Jennifer Spring again. So I would like to recap some of the key points in this budget presentation, as Stacy already outlined. First of all, the budget growth has been capped at 0%. The proposed tax levy increase is 2.32%. We will be using all of our ERS and TRS reserves, as Stacy mentioned, and this is worrisome because we know that those expenses are going to increase exponentially, most likely, in the following school year. The use of our appropriated fund balance is $117,000, which represents a 0% of the total revenue. This budget includes reductions and efficiencies totaling $1.6 million, broken down by spending categories. Instruction, this covers a $1,150,000 reduction in instruction, which includes staffing, professional development, curriculum writing, furniture, tutoring, and BOCES services. Employee benefits, the reduction of $200,000 includes reductions in staff and related expenses such as TRS. Operations and maintenance, this reduction of $170,000 includes reductions in materials and supplies and equipment. Transportation is reduced by $107,000 through reductions in field trips and CDTA. In a post-COVID world, reductions in these areas will prove very difficult to overcome when we return. Students will return with wider gaps in their learning. We will need all of our teachers to help overcome the learning gaps caused by the closure. Students will return with a much greater need for social emotional support than ever. We will need all of our staff members to help our students overcome the effects of the trauma caused by the pandemic and the closure. We will need to disinfect our buildings to a daily and nightly standard never seen before. We will need to order additional disinfecting and cleaning supplies. We will need to order PPE. We will need all of our custodians and cleaners to help keep our buildings safe from the virus. Next slide, please. Next steps. We will continue to analyze the budget, our spending plan, and review district data, class sizes, and return on investment of current programs and services with our administrative team. We will continue to conduct discussions with all collective bargaining units to discuss possible efficiencies. I am recommending that we schedule a Board of Education budget workshop for next Tuesday, May 5th, to include information on the April 30th measurement period and to finalize budget discussions. While we are still not sure of the official date of the budget vote, as we are still waiting for the governor, there are deadlines we must comply with. We will need to submit the property tax report card to SED before the second May board meeting with the particulars of our budget. Therefore, I am recommending that the Board of Education approve next year's budget at the May 6th meeting. Engage the community through a thought exchange process or some manner in which we can engage the community and get their input. To give you an idea about what thought exchange is, it's an online platform which allows people to pose a question to others. That would be us. It allows respondents to share their thoughts and provide as many responses as they like. The next step then is for people to rate the responses of others, depending on how strongly they agree or disagree with an idea. People can rate as many thoughts as they like. And then these thoughts are sorted and rated and shared with all of the respondents. Other communities are using this as an option, and I thought it is something worth trying in Cohoes. And I would like to work on this with Erin Cagwin. It is important to engage our community, and I think that obviously the closure has made it a little different for that, but we want to make sure that we're making this extra effort. Next slide, please. So at this time, we would like to ask for questions from the board, and I would also like to remind the public, please email your comment to boecomment@cohoes.org, and we would be happy to answer your questions.
Jennifer, you had 2 dates listed there, May 5th and May 6th. Were you suggesting a meeting on both of those days? I just want to make sure.
I am. I'm suggesting an additional meeting on the 5th that we hadn't planned, but to go ahead with that workshop so that we can talk more about budget discussions. And again, we can see if we did get any take back in state aid from that look back period. So those were my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from other board members?
From listening to remarks from the governor, it just seems as though we'll be uncertain as far as state aid goes. I don't know how long, but we'll get through maybe the entirety of our process and still not know about our biggest source of revenue, and that's state aid. It puts us in a really difficult position, especially if and I don't know how we wouldn't be talking about reductions when we're still uncertain of our state aid.
Absolutely, Mark. This is unprecedented, and the impact on schools and every aspect of our life in New York State and in our country is being impacted. It's very difficult to plan right now. There's no question about that, especially with these additional look back periods, which could even make our situation even more dire.
Jennifer, this is Nadia. I am curious about the thought exchange. What's the timeline on that? Is it going to happen prior to the additional conversations with staff?
Yes, so this is something that actually Guilderland piloted, and they had good results, and people were chiming in. It's an app from a phone, so it's very easy to get that in place. And our BOCES is someone who can help us with that. So it was an offer from our BOCES, and I think it's something to look into, and we can get it going. We can get it going soon. So I don't mean to put words in Erin's mouth, but I'm very interested, and with Erin's help, I think we can do it pretty soon.
So it's just an interactive platform, like a bulletin board type
So
application?
basically, we could ask about their thoughts on the budget, and then people put in responses, and then other people would rate them.
Understood. So, but I'm asking, I guess, what we have to sort of put the pedal to the metal on this. Yes, if you're looking for a budget vote in 10 days, we have not finalized reductions or program cut or anything like that, and we would prefer to have the community's input before we made those decisions. Correct?
Well, so the budget's the budget. Our spending plan has to match our revenue. So that's what you saw this evening. But yes, in what that actually looks like as far as programs, services, and staffing, yes, we can absolutely, I thought use thought exchange to gain input on that.
Great. So just keep us apprised of the timeline of that, please.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Hi, this is Margaret. So I have questions on that too. So it seems like there is going to have to be a quick turnaround, like Nadia said. How are we going to advertise this as an available resource to engage our community, and without us having, like, we have no specific information. It's just 1.1 million in instruction, and that's it. It's not, there's no tangibles here for us to know what we're talking about
Sure.
for cuts. So, I mean,
can,
it's even hard for me to look at this and.
so I can share with you, what does that mean? Okay, so as far as, there's a difference between a cut that's not based on a retirement or a position that, you know, somebody maybe left the district, we would call that attrition. So totally, we, you know, again, what that would equal is 15.5 positions cut. In addition, it would be 5.5 positions that would not be filled. Those would be lost to attrition. So that's 21 positions. And then additionally, 1.5 positions lost to grants that either expired or were restructured in some way that could not support those positions any longer. So that's what the total impact could look like.
Based on
Well, it's
further discussions with the administrative team. I just don't feel like this presentation is like we have moved forward very far from 2 weeks ago.
So,
you know?
Right. So we have made further, obviously, we've had further discussions with our administrative team to review the class size data. We do have additional recommendations for reductions in positions, and that is the number that I'm giving you. And there are things for, obviously, the board to continue to discuss. And
that's going to happen on May 5th. We're going to have a breakdown of what each of these things are.
So we can discuss some of those things now, and we can also continue the discussion into Tuesday.
Okay. I mean, like I said, I feel like this is not, I mean, I get that there's an amount that you have identified here in each of the areas, but like I said, this is not tangible information. Like transportation, that's all CDTA busing stopped, all field trips stopped. I don't know.
So it's a reduction of CDTA. Again, this is a board decision. You know, what would the board like to do with, you know, for example, CDTA, elementary band, we had a retirement. So is that something the board, you know, is looking to fill? Is that something that we're looking to cut due to the attrition of a retirement? Again, I think the goal is to be able to provide as strong a quality education as possible. So we can look at band and say, well, if we eliminate elementary band, there's basically, we're cutting the program almost in half in the feeder program. So these are things that the board, you know, we would like to discuss and get input from the board. You know, I know teacher leaders came up. So again, that's something that, so these are hard conversations to have because there's so much value in each one of these areas. So I understand completely, especially when we look at next gen standards. We look at the continuity of learning time during this closure and the virtual learning. The teacher leaders have provided significant, you know, leadership with their departments. And half of the teacher leader positions are grant funded. But these are things to discuss as well.
I mean, I think that we were still kind of thinking that there was going to be some sort of, you know, a meeting taking place with all of the administrative team talking about reductions, but that was like a month ago, you know?
Yeah.
But
so,
now it's like we have 2 weeks to make all these decisions, but none of these conversations have happened. This, you know.
So we have had, yeah. So we have had conversations with our admin team. You know, we discussed all of this. We went through, and they gave us recommendations for further reductions. So that's where I'm getting this number from.
So are those reductions presented to us?
I have not discussed with staff who potentially will be losing a position. I have not done that at this point.
I can. It's Mark. So I believe what Margaret's looking for, and I am as well, is a listing of the possible reductions. But I would like to see the recommendations, and I know when I say recommendations, I understand that no one wants to see any of these, but areas that if we had to come up with a certain amount of money, that our administrative team would suggest this is where it come from. But I'd like to see a list extend beyond that. So as the board is deliberating over what stays and what goes, we're looking at an extensive list of services and costs that are not mandated, that where cuts could come from, and which of those would be proposed by our management team.
I can do that for you for May 5th.
And I would also want to give consideration, given that things are evolving as they are, I personally think we should give ourselves as much time as we can, and later rather than earlier. I don't know what the absolute point is that we need a budget established, but I'd like to give ourselves as much time as we can. These are going to be painful decisions.
Agreed. And part of the difficulty is that things are changing so quickly, but we still haven't gotten a definitive answer from the governor on the timeline and on when the budget vote is going to be held and how that is going to be held as well. But I understand.
But in the meantime, that would give us more time, correct?
Potentially, we could have more
the vote
time.
is pushed back, so that our whole timeline will likely give us more time.
Potentially. But for the May 5th budget workshop, I can have all the lists of positions, and I can also have the list of other areas to consider that are not.
Can we get that ahead of time? It's
Yes.
hard to, like just getting this budget presentation, we don't have time to actually dig into anything. And I these conversations really need to be productive if we're going to be held to a timeline. And this is obviously not going to be an easy decision for any of these things. And I want to be able to have the time to take and consider what needs consideration. I mean, we have said that we will look at every opportunity and option that we possibly can, but I feel like, and I know that because we're in this virtual world, I feel like it's a little rushed, that we don't have the time to go through the materials. So if we get it before the 5th meeting, that would be better. I would appreciate that.
Dr. Brown, did you have you had conversations with any staff members that, I mean, are there cuts that you're sure are going to happen? That's what I understand. There are some cuts here that you believe are going to happen. Have all those staff members been part of a discussion with you, or no?
So remember, there are basically 2 phases. The first phase was the pre-COVID-19 phase. And we had discussions with those individuals.
Yes.
So we will circle back with them and just tell them, yes, this is happening. And then there are the additional phase from the new state aid runs.
And I think that was my question. You had told us you had talked to, had discussions with some staff members, but have you had discussions with additional staff members besides the initial ones?
Not the ones from the phase 2.
Okay. And so when, I know you can't say definitely because we haven't had the discussion, but are there maybe some staff members out there that should be told it's a possibility?
Yeah, so I think me, how I like to be upfront with people, and that was my approach in phase 1. I'm not looking to withhold any information about people. I understand completely. So yes, that is the next step, is to tell people that, you know, these are possibilities and yes, I can do that.
And that will happen before May 5th.
So I can tell them absolutely that it's a possibility, and then we can finalize things on May 5th. How does that sound?
Well, that's fine. It's just, you know, I know people are wondering, is it me? You know, I mean, just,
I
think
understand.
we don't want to rattle anybody
Right.
during this whole pandemic. I understand it's stressful enough for our teachers and staff members, but, you know, I mean, we're headed into May here. I mean, it's, in all fairness, am I on the chopping block or not?
Right.
I mean,
And we have been working quickly, and I understand that we're not there completely yet. There's a lot of obviously, you know, discussion and thought that goes into making each one of these decisions. It's nothing that's made quickly. So we are moving quickly, even though we're not there yet. But yes, I will follow up on all of those points.
okay, thank you.
Jennifer, this is Nadia. I have a question about if we exhaust the ERS and TRS reserves this year, and there's a double digit, for all, even a single digit increase next year, when we know that the aid is probably going to be bleak again, what happens?
So this really is a multi-year, you know, budget constraint and budget challenge. I know that we are, you know, we're on track. We're trending favorably to have a savings this year because of the closure, which is, I believe, $317,000. If we do not get a take back from state aid, we could put that in to replenish those reserves. But if we do get less monies in foundation aid from the state, then that savings will have to obviously help us, you know, meet that additional shortfall for us. But it's a concern, Nadia. It's a huge concern for us.
So we don't have a plan to address next year. We're just trying to cover. I mean, the governor came out on what, Sunday, he said 50, up to 50%. Then on Tuesday, he clarified it and said it could be 20% additional aid cut for education. That's a lot of money for us. That decimates the district. Are we planning on using the savings from this year's closures to cover that potential 20 additional percent?
Yes. Yes.
A 20% reduction in state aid would be $3.3 million. So that's more than our
So it,
fund
like,
balance and our
triples.
reserve fund.
And it triples our existing gap. So these painful decisions that we haven't made yet on this small gap quadruple.
Yeah. If a 50% reduction would be over $8 million. So when we talk on our BOCES calls, the guidance from all other school districts is we would have to take a look at how we're providing instruction, and it would look much different. It couldn't look the same. It just simply couldn't.
This is Margaret. I just, was that the ERS, TRS, was this part of our 5-year plan, or we're doing this now because of the situation that we're in, depleting these reserves?
So the ERS initially was going to be exhausted in this school year, but we didn't use it last year. So we actually prolonged that 1 year. Unfortunately, we just established TRS and we're using it in the upcoming budget. So that was not part of the 5-year plan. We did not use debt service, excuse me, at all in the proposed plan. So we do have 1.8 roughly left in that reserve. And the only other reserves that we really have after this proposed budget would be EBLAR. Now we do have retirement incentives in our contracts, which would be funded through the EBLAR reserve, and we do expect a number of retirements next year that will help And that is already included in the long-range plan. That assumption, that breakage assumption was already included in the long-range plan, but we do have a reserve to fund that incentive. So really, it's just going to be, we have a tax tertiary reserve. Again, that reserve is what we anticipate for the cases that are known. Workers' comp, there will be a balance of about $175,000 remaining, and then it's just going to be the debt service reserve that'll be remaining.
Stacy, may I ask a question? Is next year the last year on the contract that incentive is being offered?
So, excuse me, next year's CTA contract ends, right? So it'll have to be renegotiated. Yeah. There are, CSEA has contract language where they're paid out, whether they leave for another job or if they retire. So that's in the life of the contract. Yep.
Thank you.
Stacy, this is Margaret. I have another question. We're looking at transportation cuts. Now, we had discussed that we had to go back out to bid for that contract. Have we made any progression there, or are we going to bid?
Yes, I'm working on it. I'm actively working on it. Yes.
Okay.
I haven't finalized it yet, though. It's not finalized.
Okay. And then the use of these funds, I mean, is this, I know that we have employed Dr. Timms as a consultant in the past. Has he been in review of any of this information? Are these recommendations? I mean, we've paid for services. I want to know if he has participated in any of this and if these are based on recommendations from both yourself and from him.
I've actually worked with Rick over the past couple of weeks on revising the long-range plan, and yeah, so it's clear that we need to make these reductions. As we discussed in the fall, just the cash position, we were really using our reserves and our fund balance to balance our budget. We can't continue on that path. And we were in a 1 to 2 year trajectory. So these adjustments have to be made. He absolutely agreed with that. It's really the state aid piece is uncertain. It's something that we haven't experienced before. It's something that we are going to have to plan for. And again, this is going to be a multi-year situation. Again, with the retirement incentive, I do think that we'll have some breakage, and that will help. But as you know, we have $775,000 that we're using for ERS and TRS reserves, and we won't have those reserves next year. So right away, that's a $775,000 revenue shortfall. And then we don't know what's going to be happening with state aid. So this is going to be a multi-year situation. Absolutely. And yes, he agreed with all of these things. We've discussed it over the past 2 weeks. Yep.
Okay. For just, it's Margaret still. Another question. Course recommendations. As far as I know, the high school was not complete with doing finishing their counseling meetings. Like that, we were in the middle of doing all of that when we closed. So we're talking about looking at class sizes, but we haven't had meetings for next year. How is that happening? Are they doing them virtually, or is that work still going on?
Great news. They have completed. They've completed all of their meetings with their students, and you remember Mrs. Gaber recently had a baby, so her colleagues met with the remainder of her students on her caseload, her 9th graders. So that happened, and we've already reviewed our course selections, and we've already reviewed staffing. We've already eliminated electives. So actually, we are very far along in that process, and I've already determined where those reductions can be made, and that was based on recommendations from the high school administrative team. So I also wanted to say that this recent phase 2, there are 8 additional cuts cuts, including those lost to attrition, in addition to what we already had. So the majority of these positions were already communicated in the phase 1 before COVID-19, and now there are 8 additional ones since then. To put it into perspective. But yes, very happy with our counseling department, that, you know, they were able to do all of this, and they've done a great job.
As we're looking at the scheduling process and making judgments, what we can offer, what we can't offer, they will all be part of the potential listing that the board will get as soon as we can, that will show reductions that, again, that the team would put forward, but then potential reductions beyond that, because there may be items that the board feels we can live without, and maybe the management team doesn't. But so we'll be able to see a list that would go beyond what's being recommended to other possibilities.
Absolutely.
So what I would look for would be these are services, and within reason, if there's any such thing as reason anymore, but these are areas that we're not mandated to offer, but we do offer. And also, I think it's time, you know, we're going to have to, as Stacy alluded to, we may have to look at instructional methodologies differently than we ever have before. For example, there could be classes, higher end classes, that we want to offer, but we can't afford the staffing, and we may look for other ways to deliver instruction. I can see districts coming together and having the instruction put out by whatever the location is, and several schools come together and share the cost. And I think we're going to need to look at ways that we haven't had to before. And it may allow us to continue providing some courses that we possibly can't afford on our own, but by partnering with other districts or colleges. I know there's colleges that broadcast. We do some of that already. We may need to look at doing more of that than we ever have before. I just think we're going to need to think differently on how we deliver instruction.
So Mark, I completely agree with you. And these are discussions that I have every day with my superintendent colleagues and with our BOCES and Anita Murphy, because we do need a more regional approach. We're not going to survive otherwise. And for example, AP Calculus. So we talked about that. How do we continue to offer our upper level courses, our most rigorous program to all of our students? So we had 2 students who selected that for next year. Remember, we have still 25 students taking the majority of their courses at HVCC next year. But we want to still offer this opportunity to our students. So we are going to broadcast in for distance learning. But that was not an easy task for our principal, Brian Wood, to arrange, because every high school has a different schedule. So when you talk about a regional approach, we need to have regional schedules so that we can allow for this collaboration on a much larger level than just each high school doing its own thing.
Dr. Spring, this is Sue. What about what's going to happen? I'm just thinking ahead to next year. Our juniors now take, all these regents in their junior year, and they've lost 3 months of instruction, and they'll have to take these regents next year. Where do we get them additional instruction to take those regents? How do we do that?
So let me just clarify your question. So we talked about the regions last time, remember? So you're talking about, right, seniors, juniors who are exempt, let's say, from the US history exam.
Yes.
Okay. So the following year, they would take their economics, they take their government. So they wouldn't have a Regents exam, obviously, to take, unless they do not pass the course, as we talked about, they do not go to summer school, then yes, they would be re-enrolled in the class starting all over again.
So that could adjust some class sizes here is my point. That's where I was headed
Could,
with that.
absolutely. It could adjust some class sizes. Yes.
Could cause some overflow.
It could change our numbers. And as you know from your experience in the school district, that you try to get students to go to summer school, right? And sometimes that doesn't happen, and that does impact the scheduling for the next school year. So yes, we are aware of that.
And I think summer school is going to be a topic for discussion. And we may need to get word out sooner rather than later that people shouldn't be depending on summer school. I'm not proposing that, but it's going to be listed. It needs to be listed. We don't have to do summer school, and I understand the need for it. I understand the arguments, but desperate times call for some desperate decisions, and summer school might be one.
So we hope all of our students pass, Mark.
Any other additional questions from board members? Thank you all for asking great questions so that I didn't have to chime in and ask any. I felt like all my things were answered by everybody else. So
One
it's,
more thing, if you don't
go
mind.
ahead.
This is Margaret. Jennifer, can you, I'm not sure if you told us, when are you meeting with the admin team? And is that meeting the one that you were talking about Nadia and Rick participating in?
So there are a few meetings this week. So admin council is tomorrow. So that's a standing meeting every Thursday afternoon. And then I did meet with our leadership of our 3 collective bargaining units. And one of the suggestions was to have a follow-up meeting to review the line by line budget, budget, as well as our BOCES services that we engage in. So that is something that I've set up for Friday, and I have invited our 2 board members who are part of our budget committee to be a part of that if they're available. It's Friday at 3. So we can continue to look on a deeper, more granular level as to what those items look like.
Stacy, can you, so if we're looking at all programs, because obviously we would prefer to keep people, because that's where, what we've heard the need is. BOCES services and programs, can you just talk to us, how does this, we get revenue returned, right, from BOCES aidable programs. So I'm just curious, bang for our buck as far as, when we're looking at different programs, if there's a differential in anything.
Yeah, there would be a difference. If it's a person, so it's capped at their salary, it's not the flat, I'll call it 60% aid as if it were a piece of equipment, for example. So there is differentials, yes, that should be factored because it could have a revenue impact in the following year. So yes, when we're having those discussions, we'll want to take a look at exactly what we're talking about and what the revenue impact could be as well. Yep, that's a very good point, Margaret.
So a person, you said, is just their salary.
It's capped at, I'm going to say 30, yeah, 35,000. Yeah.
And
it's
then,
capped. So,
for example, our like CTE students. If we have kids that are attending a VOTEC program.
So salary wouldn't be impacted in that. Special ed is different. Special aid is different. It's not through BOCES aid. It's through the private and public excess cost aid. They're stackable. So the BOCES would fall under the private excess cost aid. So that's a separate separate revenue source.
Stacy, can you explain the 5-year averaging for our BOCES CTE program, our student attendance?
Yeah. So BOCES CTE is built off a 5-year average. So say, for example, our numbers are high this year and next year, but we're lower in years 1, 2, and 3. We would pay a reduced FTE count, but as those numbers grow, and they have been growing, so there is growth. So even if we put a cap next year on the number of students that were to participate in VOTEC, it would take basically 4 years to catch up with us because it's a 5-year average.
Well, I mean, this sounds like this is not a one and done problem. It sounds to me like, you know,
Right.
we're in for the long haul here. So I think, you know, some of those things need to be considered.
Sure.
Again, about, sorry, about us, Mark, timeline. So we will be given these possible reductions. And I would like to give us as much time as we can. And what is the date that we would have to make, the Board of Education would have to make a final determination?
So that's still the unknown. If we are looking to have our budget vote again, what is that going to look like? Again, these are unknowns for us. If that is to occur at the beginning of June, then we do need to turn in our property tax report card to the state. And Stacy, do you know how many days before that has to happen before our budget vote? How many days is that? 20 days? You know?
Sorry, I'm looking at the timeline.
Okay.
I know the latest that any of our neighboring districts are taking action is the 13th. That was Schenectady.
So we could schedule a board meeting for the following week if we wanted to have additional time.
I'm in favor of that, not only, and not because we're indecisive, but because there may be information then that we don't have now.
So Mark, are you suggesting that instead of the May 5th meeting, we turn our May 6th meeting into a budget workshop, and then we schedule a board meeting for the following Wednesday for the board to finalize the budget?
Yes, that's personally, that would be my request.
I'm in the same, this is Helen, by the way. I'm in the same boat as Mark. I think there's too many factors in the air right now for us to say May 6th has to be the day that we have it in. As much as we can prolong it out, I think we should.
Okay.
I agree.
Me too.
So then we're looking at another board meeting, May 13th. And we can add that into on our website. And
Okay, so
all
are
the
we saying
notifications.
that the workshop is May 5th and then the board meeting, the follow-up board meeting is May 13th? Or is the workshop May 6th?
May 6th. So we're canceling May 5th. So we're going to stay with our Wednesdays. So May 6th will be our budget workshop. And then May 13th will be the board meeting where the board will finalize the budget.
Thank you.
I just want to let the rest of the board know, I will scan all the notes that Rick and I take. So everybody has it in advance of the next workshop.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board comments? I do have a handful of public comments that I can get to, if that's not the case.
Is our meeting at 6 still on
6
Wednesday?
o'clock, correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump into public comment. We can come back to board comment if there is a need. So I got a handful of questions. I'm going to start with the first one here. A comment from Dave Belaski. And their question or comment was, given the current financial condition we as a city, state, and country are experiencing, and with the governor stating publicly on many occasions that he's going to be reducing state aid to schools, I want to know that the school board is not expecting taxpayers to fundraise for the various unions. As far as this individual knows, the teachers and principals in our district have never been asked to freeze their salaries or take a pay cut in order to close the budget gap. And that this individual is asking each member of the board to state publicly that they support asking the teachers and principals to freeze their salaries for the next school year in an effort to minimize the impact to taxpayers as a result of the governor's statements and actions. So that is Dave's question. I'll take an initial stab at some of that. We have already talked, as Jennifer has alluded to, with starting conversations with the collective bargaining agreements or units. And we, as a board, cannot just, unilaterally decide that folks on any of the units will take a pay freeze for the next year. It's not something the board has control over, but it is, we are engaging our units in discussion in every possible way that we could reduce the impact to taxpayers and to our kids, who obviously need this education, are going to need it even more as times get more and more difficult. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to chime in for that question?
I would just like to say that there's no opposition on the board. We all are supportive of these negotiations, and we're trying to do the best we can. And there's no one on the board that is suggesting we not meet with our unions and try to see if we can come to some agreement where we can save ourselves some money.
And I will say, I'll thank, in the past, when I first got on the board, it was around difficult times like this, and our teachers did, take a raise, a flat raise that year. And then administrators have also helped in certain circumstances. And Jennifer, as a superintendent, has volunteered for next year to take a pay cut to try to lead the way. So it has happened in the past where we've been able to come to an agreement to the betterment of, in these tough situations, to the betterment of our kids, to best, deal with the cards we're given. And I personally am hopeful that we'll be able to have some sort of, accommodation that we can all work to lessen the burden on our students.
This is Margaret. I also just wanted to say that, I appreciate, the unity in the conversations, having all three bargaining units having conversations together, to show that this is a joint effort. But also just to note that these are just happening, and it does take time, for information to get out and decisions to be made. So, we're all trying to be patient, kind of like hurry up and wait type of thing. But, these conversations are just beginning. So even though we don't have information to share, we are, again, taking a look at everything very seriously and trying to work with everyone.
Okay. I did have two questions from Megan Cherubino. One is about busing. Why are we not canceling the CDTA bus program? It has not had a significant impact on attendance and could save 3 teacher positions. So I know first we wanted to see if there were reductions that we could get them to make, which was the 30% cut that Jennifer alluded to, that we were able to negotiate with them. And then we're also looking at state aid as a possibility. But on top of that, the board is not, completely on the table with cutting it completely. It is one of the many levers that we can pull as we talk about what we need to do.
Can I just clarify a point? So I did share with the board that, again, this is the board's decision, but just to clarify Megan's question. So CDTA did come back with a 30% reduction. So that is $84,000. So that is less than what we originally had agreed to. the fact that so it's not 3 teachers. So I just want to be clear on that. And there's also the opportunity, again, to get aid on students who are traveling to HVCC. But again, are we going to be sending students to HVCC? So it's even difficult to even talk about busing, to even know what kind of world in September we'll be going back to. But again, these are decisions that the board will have to be discussing.
Jennifer, can you pull together the attendance rates year over year before busing and after busing? I think that's sort of what's going to help guide the decision about whether to keep or cut.
So I think that we saw the most significant impact on the middle school, where students were, becoming early riders, and they were continuing at the middle school. I think what we saw is that attendance at the high school is difficult, and there are chronic absenteeism issues, and CDTA did not solve our chronic absenteeism issues, but it did address safety for our students living on the island. And it also increased student mobility. But I can get you attendance data, but I don't think it's going to significantly show that there was an improvement at the high school. I think it did improve on-time arrival, and that was most significant at the middle school.
Can I also ask, this is Margaret, if we can you mentioned that transportation aid for students that are attending Hudson Valley. As far as I know, that's only 25 students, and I don't know what transportation aid is on that, and if that's even significant enough for us to consider. So is that a figure you can also get to us just as we're considering?
I will work.
Yeah, I can do the work up on that.
Stacy, yeah.
Sorry.
So again, I don't know how we'll get the students to HVCC, but it's something we'll have to, and the grant isn't going to pay for that, but it's something that we'll have to discuss.
Right, but we can't keep an entire CDTA program for $55,000 to get 25 kids to Hudson Valley.
I understand. There is strong ridership, and I'd be happy to provide that with you. But again, this is the board's decision, and the board, alone will make that decision. But I will get that information for you.
I would send the ridership to date along with your recommendation. That'd be great. Thanks.
The hard thing is with the ridership, it doesn't give us detailed information, like how many of those swipes are actually used to go to school. We had a student at our board meeting a month ago and says, she said, I don't take the bus to school, but I bring it to work. I just feel like it's not.
So yes, the data.
Valid data.
We have total ridership by line, by, red, blue, or green, arrival to in the morning and dismissal time, how many students are using it totally. And then we have how many students are using the other lines. So the way the information comes to us is through their student IDs. And then that has to be cross-referenced to school tools so that we can get a picture of which students are riding the bus, and I can get you that information.
And so we do know then, based on the lines that they are riding, if they're going to work or not, because the lines only go, basically to school.
We have that information, yes.
Does Hudson Valley provide their students with bus passes?
So our students aren't, maybe Mark could help me here. They're not matriculated students. So as far as I know, that wouldn't be an option. Mark, do you have any comment on that?
I believe that I know matriculated students that are in programs in Hudson Valley are provided transportation. They get their student ID gives them transportation. When we asked about this before, and I believe that the college and high school students did not, but these 25 kids are kind of in a gray area. So I'm not sure. Hudson Valley does provide transportation. Student IVs work on the CDTA buses, and I'd have to find out, and I can look into it about this situation with our kids.
Thank you, Mark.
So a follow-up question from Megan was the elementary buildings have given up library space, conference rooms, and are using every inch possible, and that she felt that the middle school and high school have space that could be restructured and utilized in other ways to possibly bring back the offices from Page Ave to a building. And I think there's a couple of different assumptions in this question. We've talked before about I think I have another question separately about where are we with, could we sell Page Avenue or not? And so that's a whole somewhat related question as well. I don't know if anyone wants to just kind of.
I can get started and then I'll have Stacy chime in. So obviously this isn't a fix for tomorrow. So if we did sell the building, I'm not sure how much it's valued at, then the proceeds from that would be used to offset debt service? Is that correct, Stacy? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so any proceeds on the sale of a building would go to the debt service reserve, so it couldn't be used to pay for any operating expenditures. It would have to be used towards debt service of bond payments. Yep.
And then as far as, bringing back the offices that we have at Page Ave to a building in hopes of, I assume, financial savings. The conversation we had not that long ago, maybe 2 or 3 board meetings back, was that the middle school needed that space. And we're using it now, even though it's only partially correctly configured.
The middle school is utilizing that space. And remember, part of the space, it was never renovated really for nice classroom space. And part of it, the roof was leaking. So there was one classroom not even accessible because of that leakage. And then another issue is, I'm going to say students' safety. So here we were on the 3rd floor, and people going to taxpayers, vendors, anybody coming to our offices had to go through the entire building. So I wouldn't recommend that space, but if there are other opportunities or other ideas people have for a different space, I think that we can definitely consider that. Having our own entrance is something that it would be really important to do. But definitely if there are other ideas, and obviously we need to stay together, that does help to facilitate our own collaboration, but so we're open for ideas, absolutely.
Yeah, and so my understanding is we have not found a configuration that would save us money or work better, or work just as well. And that's as far as moving things from Page Avenue.
So this is Margaret. I'm curious to know what the operating cost savings would be if we were to relocate. Because the truth is that those offices were in that building for, I don't even know how long, but I understand that you're saying there's a safety issue with having people come. You did it for 20 years. I don't think that there was really much of an issue, but if we're relocating, we've just, the conversations that we're talking about of, having to cut staff is probably going to open up some areas that could be considered.
So, Dr. Spring, there is a separate entrance. The only issue would be the elevator, but there is a separate entrance in the back. I don't know how, where to climb the stairs to those offices. I don't know how the security would work on entering the building there. I don't know how that would work either, but the only issue would be the elevator for those who would need to come up via the elevator to the 3rd floor. Right. They could use the separate entrance unless an elevator was necessary.
For visitors, Sue, for visitors, yeah.
Yes.
It's something to explore, definitely. I know that when districts are looking to cut their expenses, they close buildings. So I think it's definitely something that we need to explore and see what the possibilities could be. So I definitely think it's something, you know, to look into.
Another
I'd like to
thought
put
on
a
the
price
page.
tag on it if we could. I'm sorry, Natty.
Go ahead, Mark, go ahead.
I'd like to put an operational price tag on it. I'm not sure the sale of the building, we can't do much with that. We have no idea. And as Stacy said, it wouldn't help us operationally. So just to know what would be the savings, what would the savings be if, and I think it's if, because we have to figure out how we could do this. If we relocated our administration back into a building, what would we save?
I
can do a mock-up of that. That was Stacy.
So my question too about Page Avenue is, we could look at, in addition to the operational costs right now as it is, but also the feasibility of perhaps moving maybe the Van Skyke pre-K into that building, or putting some students back. The building becomes aidable, I believe, at that point.
Stacy, can you clarify that? I mean, we're not looking at any building projects on that.
Well, there's two spaces downstairs that are great spaces. If we're looking at social distancing, there's a ton of room. If we put two classes, two pre-K classes, or two other kinds of classes in that space, we're freeing up some of the room in the building so that if we have to space kids out when we go back, it's an option.
It's something to consider, absolutely.
If I remember correctly, previously, the last time we looked, there were only certain spaces in the building that were up to code for having students in them. And I can't remember off the top of my head what that was, but I feel like there were only some of the spaces that could be classroom space without construction to renovate them.
This is Margaret, but we could have a potential of renting the space out, you know, which would bring us revenue.
Yeah, and we had rented it before, but we lost those tenants. And that's where this, like, part of all of this evolution happened when we migrated.
That was an in-kind relationship. So we didn't receive any rental monies, but it benefited the students of the school district and the families, yes.
So another question we got from the public is from Bill Smith. In these unordinary times, knowing the 2% cap is strangling not only schools but cities, would we consider going over the tax cap with hopes of saving jobs? And I know I had brought this up months ago. You know, what would, as just like what would the range look like? And I believe if we were to try to save everything, we'd be looking at like a 12 to 15% increase in local taxpayers' portion, which just isn't, you know, anywhere near feasible for what we could ask people to do. And so you know, we're already asking for 2.35, I believe, or whatever the number that Stacy mentioned earlier. And to go beyond that, we would, at least personally, I feel like we're already cutting so much. It would be so hard to figure out what to add for that little bit that we could go above for. I don't really know that how we would make that argument and what we would do with that.
Worry that coming out of this pandemic, that there's the damage is going to be far and wide, and people are not going to be in a good place financially. And it comes back to the my question I've had for most of my life. Why is it that only the school budget is going to be voted on? So we're going to have a situation where people are in trouble and there's only one budget they can vote down. So I'm concerned about budgets, our budget, and I think far and wide that budgets are going to be a serious concern. I think if we ever go above the cap, then I would be really, really worried if we can pass a budget, if we go over the cap. And I'm concerned if we can pass a budget anyway. And it won't have a lot to do with the school. It will just have to do with the economics that people are faced with in general. And I wish they could vote on all their budgets, but they can't. They can only vote on one budget. And it's going to be a challenge to get budgets passed this year.
The last question slash more of a comment I have is from Lynette McGovern, which is, would you be able to look at attendance data pre-CDTA and post-CDTA to see if the CDTA bus improved attendance at all, in addition to ridership? And if we have seen an increase in attendance, it should be something we consider keeping. But if it hasn't, then maybe it's something we can put to the side as a cost saver. And I think that's the information that we have gotten some of that previously. Again, maybe 3 board meetings ago, but I think if we get that again, that's essentially what we were requesting, Jennifer.
Absolutely, I can get that for you. Yeah, I'll get that information. So Lynette's comments were similar to what Nadia was saying.
Yes.
Yeah, so I want to say the strongest ridership line was the line to Van Skyke Island, but so I think the students at the island were definitely taking advantage of that. But I can get that information to you, and yeah, I'll get that.
Yeah, I think specifically the ridership in addition to the attendance data so that we can look at them together.
Hi, this is Margaret. Would it benefit us to look at only busing the island? I mean, we could we offer that as a solution,
That might work.
and what that cost would be?
I can follow.
I think that, you know, like Mark said, we really have to take the time to go through all of this, you know. I mean, obviously the safety of our kiddos is important, and we want to make sure that, you know, we're getting them to school safely, that they're using it for school. So if we could get an idea of what the cost savings would be if we just had one run as well.
So what I would also like to do is prepare this information for our next week, our May 6th board meeting, so that I can share this with everybody. So a lot of the questions that were brought up, so that's how I would like to approach this, give it to the board, but also share it with everybody at our next meeting.
Yes, this is Sue. I wanted to ask that same question Margaret did about, could we break it down with just Van Skyke Island students on that bus? Do we know, out of the 25 students, do we have a general idea of how many of those really take the bus to Hudson Valley? Like, do you have that on the top of off the top of your head, or no? I mean, I feel a lot of kids drive, so I don't know, I'm asking.
So again, I think some kids will probably drive, but again, how to be equitable and opportunities. So that was the concern there.
Thank you.
This is Helen. Can we look at what stops have the most swipes by any chance? Like what bus stops specifically get the most swipes?
I can assign the lines. For example, green goes to Van Skyke, and we've got the blue line, which goes around Manor and then up around McDonald Drive. That one is the least, you know, has the lowest participation.
But that's the whole line. So we can't look at specific stops where the bus stops and say people from this general area might take it more than maybe people from this general area.
So the strongest ridership is from the Red Line, you know, the Saratoga sites, Remsen Street, you know, coming up Rulier Heights, and then, you know, the green line from Van Skyke Island. Those are the 2 lines that are, you know, the most popular.
Okay.
Jennifer, maybe also the potential of bus passes if we, you know, would we have room in the FRP grant if we were to get, you know, if we couldn't figure out the situation with Hudson Valley, to just get bus passes for a few kids? Or
I mean, we can see about that. You know, unfortunately, they're not rolling monies over. It ends June 30th. I mean, maybe we can have an advance purchase. I don't know, but I can look into that. Yeah.
With that, I think that ends our comment period for around the agenda. If we could get a motion to adopt tonight's consent agenda from the board.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Roll call, Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Pascal,
Yes.
Mrs. Annaly,
Yes.
Mr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dion,
Yes.
Mrs. Carey,
Yes.
and Mr. Nolan.
Yes. Is there any comment from the board on anything at all that we didn't cover in the previous comment period?
This is Helen. I just want to, reading the writing on the wall from and I appreciate that Tomo isn't coming right out and saying that he wants to close school for the remainder of the year, but somewhat looking at it, I think that some of us can't anticipate that the worst might actually happen. And I have a huge concern with the safety of some of our students. I mean, we have amazing social workers in the district, but their hands are kind of tied when these kids are at home and can't really speak freely or contact somebody freely. And I'm very concerned about these kids for 6 months possibly being in a situation where they have nowhere to go for safety. And considering this and thinking about this, and if we have a plan or trying to come up with a plan.
So Helen, we share your concern, and we've actually, we have a system in place where people, we have teams of staff members in buildings who are reaching out to students. So we're doing our best to try to reach out to our kids and also reaching out to those students who we know were vulnerable to begin with in vulnerable situations and difficult situations. But I think we're all worried about this. We definitely are, and the longer we're closed, and it becomes even more worrisome. But we are trying to reach out. And again, there were students that we weren't able to get in touch with. So we're now partnering with the city and trying to deliver messages that way to these families so that they can contact us.
Right.
If you have any other ideas, please let us know.
Well, I was just wondering, I know you talked about thought exchange, but the idea of maybe a child being able to text as opposed to call, is that something that we've looked at where they can get on a device and maybe contact somebody as opposed to doing it, vocally and out loud?
So I do know that students do text to their teachers and I believe that there is this ongoing communication. So I'm going to reach out to Pezzy. Do you have anything you wanted to add about this?
Yes, so students are also able to reach out through Google Classroom to their teachers.
Okay.
So there is that vehicle as well.
Okay.
And this is an area we're continuing to explore, and we've also had some discussions at grade level meetings too about, so yes, safety concerns, but also proactive reaching out to parents who might be having trouble structuring the learning day. So some recommendations from teachers and then reaching out in those areas as well.
I know there was also discussion about a lot of our students just simply not being able to be found. Are we finding out that a lot of our kids weren't in the district to begin with?
Well, so right now I can tell you at the elementary level, between the 3 elementary schools, that number is down to 12.
Okay.
Middle school was 1, high school 32.
High school is, although that 32 is now in the high 20s, I believe. So that's why we are enlisting Jim Ward and primarily for the secondary, and we're continuing We had a few students who are in Troy. We just delivered a Chromebook to Schenectady, to Waterville. Those are unique situations. There still are students on our rolls till the end of the year. So we're working.
And we're keeping in touch with parents when it comes to, I know with things financially with a lot of these families, some of these kids might not be able to stay in their housing period. And I just want to make sure that these kids, if they happen to have to move between districts, don't fall completely through the cracks, either as they come in or they leave.
Yep, and Elena is registering students as they come in. You know, our policy is if someone moves in the fourth quarter, they can remain with us. So we are continuing to work with these students and reach out through various venues.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, Peggy, this is Sue. What was the number for the middle school? You kind of broke up and I didn't get it.
One.
Okay.
A student who we believe moved.
So just a thought, this is Mark. Helen, I hear what you're saying, and obviously it is a huge concern. I'm glad to hear that we have gotten in contact with a lot more students over the past weeks. I'm wondering if it might be possible to have one central phone line, one dedicated phone line. For example, in Mechanicville, we have a VoIP phone that is assigned, we have secretaries coming in on rotation, and that one person is assigned to be answering the phones because, if parents do have questions and need to reach out, yes, email is great, but, we do still have some people that are not connected. And, if it's possible to even have one type of a central location for someone to know that somebody's going to answer the phone. We've had 2 fires in the city in the last weeks. Are we reaching out to those families and making sure, that they're set up and they're good to go? Different types of things like that. And like Helen said, reading the writing on the wall doesn't seem like we're going to be going back next week. So I'm just wondering if we could be thoughtful about how to have a centralized collection of information and someone to be a main contact. And then I just also had a question as to like how we're collecting attendance data. How are you guys being able to see who's attending?
So again, I'm going to have Peg talk about this. I mean, it's different at the elementary level versus secondary. Peg, do you want to talk about elementary in the classroom?
Yeah, and if I could just go back to the first question, in terms of the phone contacts, just so you know, administrators, secretaries, social workers, all of our phone messages also transcribe to our emails. So we are able to see when we get a message on our phone at school, even if we're not there. We also send the directions out for everyone so they do know how to contact their voicemail, but we'll continue to explore other ways. But I did want you to know that our messages are, and we have alerts on our emails. In terms of the attendance, it's something we're working on, because at the elementary in Google Classroom, once they sign on, if they've connected or not, but once they connect once, that's it, they're in the system. I'm gonna have to block my microphone in a minute, but I can tell you that. So we're looking at it more in terms at the elementary of work that is being submitted, who's attending the live Google Meets. I know all of the principals in all the buildings have contact logs, and teachers are communicating with principals on regular basis. And then even if someone isn't submitting work for, a period of time, I know that teachers, principals are reaching back out. So attendance is a little different in this virtual world. And then at the secondary level, again, they can tell through Schoology. Schoology, you can tell I believe, who has, signed on a regular basis, not just who's connected like with Google Classroom, but also through work submission.
Thank you, Peg. I'm wondering if that might be something that we can communicate to our families as far as the phone situation, that you are still receiving messages.
Yeah, I believe we did send out contact information. It is on the website for all the principals and the buildings, but I think it's a great idea to do it again. Absolutely.
And then also back to, now that we're in, the continuity of learning plan, we just had conversations with the principals too about Blackboard Connect, reminding parents and students that this work that they're doing, priority standards, builds upon future learning for next year. So we're working on, you saw the video from the high school, middle school, we're working on advertising that as well to make sure parents understand and students the importance of connecting. And Charlie's quiet now, so.
This is Helen again. Just one more thing to comment on. We also, I mean, are we considering too that some of our kids are kindergartners and first graders and second graders and don't know that they have to contact anybody if anything's wrong? It's just, like I said, their safety is just such a huge concern of mine right now because we know that we have vulnerable kids in the district, and I just want to make sure that they're all being basically accounted for.
Yeah, I would say that our elementary teachers are really doing an outstanding job of really connecting with their students and families. So.
Thank you.
And just on that note, maybe maybe we could investigate other external services or groups that provide like a text hotline or things that we might be able to partner with where maybe not even reach our staff first. But if there's like a statewide or national hotline or something, we could provide them to something they could text. I think that's worth looking at. And then maybe we could work with those groups to provide that, or they could somehow inform us if there was a concern that we needed to follow up on. With that, I do have 2 more general public comments that I wanted to get to. The first is from Natalie Partika, which was, if it's decided that busing will stop, what about having cross guards on 787? It's not considered a highway anymore, correct? That was a question that they were asking. And
The cross guards are under the employ of the city. So again, that would be a city decision.
But it is something we could talk to them about, definitely, if we do look to end the CDTA program or some kind of solution if we can come to one. So it's definitely one to consider. The other comment that we received is from Deanna Kelly, which states that it's Administrative Professionals Day. On behalf of the administrators, we would like to thank all of our administrative assistants. We cannot thank them enough for everything that they do to take care of us and our students, with a special shout out to Mary Rumsey for dealing with everyone. I'll just echo that and say thank you to all our administrative assistants, and thank you, Deanna, for bringing it up.
Here, here.
I believe that brings us to the end of our regular portion of our meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 6th, live at 6 p.m., and we will follow that up at May 13th, also at 6 o'clock. Could I get a motion to enter into executive session at 7:41 to discuss collective bargaining with our 3 bargaining units?
I'll make a motion. Helen.
Is there a second? Was that?
Second.
Okay, thanks. Okay, just for a quick roll call, Mrs. Giller,
Yes.
Mr. Pascal, Mrs. Annalee,
Yes.
Mr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dion,
Yes.
Mrs. Carey,
Yes.
and Mr. Nolan.
Yes. With that, that concludes the general part of our public meeting. And for board members, we'll take a 10-minute break and get to executive session around 7:50 or so. And thank you, everyone, for attending and listening.